Hi everyone, my name is Karen. Thank you for coming to paint with us here at Pinot's Palette. Again, I'm going to be your instructor today, whenever you're watching this video. Now, I'm going to give you guys just a quick rundown of all the materials and all the good stuff before we get started with the painting. So, first off, we should all have two brushes with us. Now, these brushes have very technical names, so pay close attention to them before we move on to the next material. Now this one I'm going to be calling the big brush. Let me know if I'm going too fast. And this one I'm going to be calling the small brush. So we're only using two brushes for this painting. I want you guys to place both brushes into your water cup just like so. Always keep them in your water cup, even if you leave them outside, even for a short period of time, they will turn hard and you will not be able to use them again, no matter how well you clean them off. So always make sure that they are in their water cup. Now we all should have at least a few pieces of paper towel. This is going to be used to clean off and wipe off your brush. I would suggest to also have a roll of paper towels, just so you can have a bunch. That way you don't have to get up in the middle of your painting. Just have it with you ready to go. Now we should all have a few paper plates to mix our colors on. Now we are going to be doing some color mixtures, not a lot. So just make sure you have a surface, a paint palette, or even some paper plates to mix some extra colors. And we should also have a paint palette or some of those to-go cups with all of these colors. Now all the colors you see on this equals this painting that you see right up here. Of course, if you want to change it up and use your own colors or do something entirely different, that is up to you. I definitely encourage you to do that. But other than that, those are some of the materials that we should have with us ready to go. Of course, make sure you have your apron with you so you don't get your clothes dirty. During the times that I will not be talking, it's going to be muted. I promise it's not a problem with the audio. It's just me being muted. Feel free to turn some music up during that time so you can jam out to some tunes instead of just complete silence. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are actually going to draw out our creature. We're just going to do the head, the body, and the ears first, and then we're going to move on to doing the background. Now, the background is a really nice galaxy textured background. That being said, you might have to add several layers towards the end once it dries. That is okay. It's going to be a little messy at first. Now, my background is not going to look the same as this example. Yours isn't going to look the same as your neighbor's, and that's the beauty of it. Everyone has a different style of painting. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take out our small brush. Now, every time I take out my small brush, I like to give it a quick rinse and pat it dry so it's not dripping wet. I'm just going to be using my small brush, and to draw out my little guy here, I'm going to be using just plain green paint. Now, the good thing about this green paint is that if you need to redraw some shapes several times, it's okay. We're going to be covering up all of these lines anyway. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to find the middle of my canvas, because I don't want him to be too tall or too low. So if you look at this finished example here, he is about halfway through my canvas, and we want to draw the top of his head halfway through the canvas. So I'm just going to eyeball it. I would say this is about halfway up my canvas. Now, another thing that I want to make sure is that I want to make sure that his head is big enough for the eyes and the ears to come out of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the head is about a hand's width wide, a closed hand's width wide. Now, one thing I want to make sure as well is that I kind of curve this top part just a tiny bit, not just a straight line. We want to give him just a tiny bit of a hump so it looks like a skull. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create the edges of his face. So all I'm going to do is just draw a straight line down. Now, I'm going to try to avoid to do a boxy shape, because I want his head to just be slightly rounded, not too boxy. And I actually want his head to be as tall as my hand. So if you need to draw those lines just a little bit longer, feel free to do so. Now, when closing off the bottom part, do not draw a straight line across. We want to make sure that his head, of course, just like everything else, is a little bit rounded. Just going to round off that bottom part. So it should be about a closed hands tall, a closed hand wide. Once you have that in, you're still using small brush, and we're still using green paint. Now I'm gonna start to add on his ears, and I'm gonna break this down into shapes and lines, just like we did the head. Now, one thing I wanna make sure is that we do not go all the way off to the edge of the canvas, otherwise his ears are going to get cut off. So I usually like to start on the right side, and all I'm going to do is just draw a straight line, just a little bit angled, almost reaching the edge of the canvas. Again, I don't want to touch the edge of the canvas. I'm going to give myself about a finger to 2 fingers worth of space. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Now, the more angled you make the ears, the taller they're going to appear. And the more straight or flat you make those lines, the flatter they're going to appear. It's up to you. Now, when connecting the bottom part of this ear, I want you guys to think of an S shape or almost like a snake. You actually want to start at the point, and I feel most comfortable starting on the left side. But if you want to start on the right ear, feel free to do so. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to start at the point. I'm going to draw a straight line. But once I start getting lower and lower and lower, I'm going to start to create that nice S curve. We want the bottom part of his ear to be a little bit wider, but we want his ear to come to a point. So it starts off straight and then it starts to curve all the way down to the bottom of his head. We're going to do the same on the other side. We're going to start at the point. We're going to slowly widen that up. Again, if they don't look the same, that is okay. Feel free to redraw this several times. At this point, if you want to make the head a little bit bigger because you feel like it's just a little squished, feel free to redraw that as many times as you'd like. We're going to cover up all of these lines anyway. Now, the very last thing we're going to do, we're not actually going to draw out his arms. We're just going to draw the edge of his robes first. It's a lot easier to do it this way. So all it is just a straight line on either side of his head. So right where his ear and his chin meet, we're just going to draw a straight line all the way down. I'm going to make mine just a little bit angled because I want his robe to be a little bit wider towards the bottom. So just angle it just a tiny bit. Just like that. Now, if you're not happy with the shape, don't worry, we will have an opportunity to fix all of these shapes later on. But for now, we're gonna move on to the background. So I'm gonna place my small brush back into my water cup, and I'm gonna take out my big brush. Remember to always rinse it out and pat it dry before you take it out, just in case. So I'm using my big brush. And the first thing that I want to do is use blue paint. Now this blue paint almost looks like navy. It's very, very dark because it's concentrated on the plate. But once you add it to your canvas, it starts to get a little bit lighter. Now, when I'm doing this, I want to work a little bit quickly and I really want to load my brush up. So I'm really loading my brush up with a lot of paint. And I want to work quickly because I actually want to add on some of these colors on top of that wet blue paint, which is going to give me that nice fuzzy look. Now, if it doesn't look great during this first step after you're done adding all the colors, it's okay. I'll teach you how to do a second layer towards the very end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a series of taps or stamps with my brush, and I'm not doing any shape at all. I'm just doing clusters of this blue paint, and you can instantly see how lighter it gets. And I'm just finding sections where I want to add in the really, really dark parts of my galaxy. Now, any gap I leave open, I'm going to add either pink, blue, or green later on, or sorry, green, pink, and purple later on. So I really want to cover the majority of my sky with this blue paint first. So I'm going to let you do that for a tiny bit. Remember, use a lot of this blue paint. That way it doesn't dry up too fast. We need the blue paint to be a little bit wet before we move on to the next color. I'm going to let you guys do that for a bit, and then I'll move you guys on. Now, as you see here, I covered about 70% of the background. I still wanted to leave some open spaces so I can add the rest of my colors on. Now, I want to work quickly. That's why I worked a little bit quick during this blue step. Now I want to rinse out my big brush. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to end up mixing with other colors, and that is okay. But I also didn't think of any shape. I just added in some blue spots where the darkest parts of my galaxy are going to be. Now, the first color I want to start off with is pink. Okay, if you like this pink, you can add this pink all over, but I'm just going to fill in some of those empty gaps or those empty spaces with some blue, sorry, some pink mixing in with some blue. Now you're gonna instantly see that it starts to become more of a purple color, and that is okay. Like I said, towards the end, I'm gonna teach you how to add in some fresh pink right on top so it makes that color pop all over again. Now you want those two colors to mesh and blend together. So this is gonna get a little messy, and that is okay. That's exactly what we want. If your brush starts to get really gross with some pinks and some blues and you're just not getting that fresh pink anymore, wipe off your brush before you start picking up some more pink from your palette. And I'm following the example right over here by adding in colors where I feel like they should go. But if you want to add this pink all over, not in sections where I'm just adding it, but maybe into some sections where the green should go instead, feel free to do so. This is your painting after all. You can always tweak and adjust any of the steps that I give you. Again, I'm just adding this in with a series of taps or dabs or stamps, just creating a lot of texture. And again, I'm just wiping off my brush since it got all muddy again. And I'm picking up some fresh white paint. And again, like I said, it's gonna look a little gross at first. It's not gonna look really pristine pink, and that is okay. So I'm just adding in some pink over here. And some of the blue might be just a tiny bit dry, and that's okay. You can always pick up a little bit more blue on that dirty brush, just a tiny bit, not a lot, to help with some of the blending. Now, this is what you're also gonna do with the purple. Once you're done with the pink, you're gonna move on with the purple, and you're gonna add some purple into some of those remaining sections, not all of them. And then you're gonna finish off by adding in some green into whatever is left. Now, every time you switch to a new color, say I'm gonna switch to a purple, I'm gonna clean out my brush entirely. Once I'm done with purple and I'm ready to move on to the green, I'm also gonna rinse out my brush entirely before I move on to another section. But also feel free to add some of these colors, not only in the gaps, but into some areas where the blue is really strong. You can always add some purple or some green or some pinks into some of the blue areas as well. Not a lot because it won't show up, but just to kind of break the routine. You don't only have to add them in the gaps. You can add them into some of these blue sections as well. So I'm gonna let you do your thing. Remember, we're gonna do pink, we're gonna move on to purple, and then we're gonna add green. So pink, purple, green. So once you're done adding in all of those colors, you're gonna rinse out your big brush. We're still using the big brush, but this time I want you guys to be extremely careful with this next color. We're gonna be adding in some black. Now this black is like permanent marker or ink. It's very staining and a little goes a long way. And if you add too much, it's never coming off. So it's always best to start off with a small amount. And I'm only adding just a tiny bit on the tip, just a very, very tiny bit. And just to make sure that I still don't have enough or don't have too much, I like to tap either once or twice on my napkin to take the extra ones off. Now I want to be extremely careful with this, and I'm only going to add this into my blue parts. And I'm keeping the brush really, really straight so it gives me those nice big stamps. Once you start to get really, really close to the colored sections where like there's some pink or some purple or even some green, be extremely careful. You want to overlap those just a tiny bit, but not too much. Now don't worry if it starts to get a little bit muddy or some of the colors start to fade. That's exactly what we want. We can always add those colors back in. We're going to start making our blue areas a little darker. You don't want to cover the blue entirely. You just want to make it a little darker. So you still want to see some blue in between. Every time I pick up some black paint, remember, tap some of it off on your napkin before adding it straight to your canvas. It just takes the excess black paint off so it's not too harsh on our canvas. And I'm going to do this in every single blue section, just all the way around. Basically, just very carefully outlining all of my greens and purples and pinks, but just very, very carefully. And if you mess up, do not worry. We can always add the color back on top. So I'm gonna let you guys do that for a bit. And after this, we have about one more step before we take a dry break. We're gonna let all of this dry before we move on to any other sections. So we have one more thing to do. All right, once you have the entire background mostly covered with black, you should still see a little bit of blue showing through, and that's okay. If your colors got muddled, again, that is okay. Towards the very end, once it's very dry, we're gonna add an extra layer to these colors and make them pop and make them look a little bit more fuzzy. So don't worry about it now if your painting looks like a hot mess. It's supposed to at this stage. It's the very, very beginning. So we have one more thing to do. If you notice, we accidentally covered part of our green lines. Now it is okay, we're just gonna clean some of that up. So once you're ready to move on, you're gonna take out your small brush. Make sure to give it a nice good rinse. And I'm just gonna dip my brush into white paint. And I'm gonna use this white paint like white out. I'm gonna completely cover my green lines, and that's okay, but all I'm doing is just cleaning up those edges. Now, if I don't clean those edges before I come back from the break, if I try to paint him in entirely with green, that green is very, very thin. And you're gonna see all of these tiny, tiny little marks that we created with our big brush. So we really wanna clean up those edges. Now, it's not going to entirely cover them up. And that's not what we want. We just wanna add in a nice thin layer of white, just to very, very lightly clean up. I'm gonna outline his entire head, so the top section of his head. I'm also gonna outline his ears. I'm not gonna outline or block out any of the ear sections in here or the chin. I'm just gonna outline the outside, just the top of his head and the ears. Now, if you wanna outline part of the robe, you can, but it's not necessary. We're gonna be using a very dark color, this gray right in here, so it does not matter if you don't clean up these. We just want to clean up the ears, the top of the head, and that's about it. So it doesn't have to be perfect as long as you have it mostly covered. Now that is going to be the very last step before we take a drying break. Again, if you're still a little bit behind, it just gave you these steps so you know exactly what to do immediately afterwards. But other than that, here in the studio, we're gonna take about a 10-minute drying break. Feel free to pause this and take as long as a break as you need to let it fully and completely dry. But once we come back from the break, we're gonna cover his entire head with green paint. That being said, while you're taking a break or doing your thing, feel free to turn the music up, put some tunes on, drink some wine, jam out, do whatever you feel like doing. Once you're ready, just hit play, and I will be back to give you the next step for the rest of this painting. All right, so it has been about 10 minutes for this painting to, for the most part, dry. Again, if some areas are still pretty tacky, majority of mine is still pretty wet, that's okay. We just let it rest for a little bit, and we also gave our arms a little bit of rest because doing all that tapping and swirling was a little bit of a workout. So what we're gonna start to work on now is our main guy. So the first thing that we wanna do is we wanna color in his entire head. Now, like I said before, these are very, very thin paints. So if you can't get a smooth, thin coat across the whole head, that is okay. If you look at this painting really up close, it's just a very, very thin coat of paint. That's exactly why we left it white. That way we don't have to worry about covering anything up. So it is going to be a thin coat of paint. So I'm gonna be using my large brush. Make sure to give it a good rinse, really, really good rinse. Scrub it out as best as you can and pat it dry before using it or dipping it into any paint color. And all we're going to be using is pure green straight from our palette. Now, like I said, I don't want to grab a whole bunch. Just dip straight down into your green on your palette. And all you're going to do is just cover the entire head with this green color. If you still see the lines along the edge of his head, that's okay. That is totally fine. It's going to help us separate the ears from the head. So I'm going to let you guys do that for a bit, and then I'll let you guys know what the next step is. All right. So if you fall behind a little bit, it's okay. I can always repeat this step. But we're going to start to work on the cup before we start doing the robe and all that good stuff. Now, once we start drawing out the cup, the green is still pretty wet. So we're actually going to draw the cup with our small brush and purple paint straight from our palette. Now that purple paint, it's going to drag through some of the green. That is okay. We're going to be covering the top of the cup with black paint, so it doesn't matter if those colors get really muddled up once you're drawing the cup. So remember, clean out your small brush before taking it out and pat it dry as best as you can. And I'm just going to dip my brush into purple paint straight from my palette. Now, the first thing that I want to do is draw the top of his cup where he drinks out of. Now, that's going to fall halfway on his head and halfway below his chin. The shape that I want you guys to think about is an oval, just a basic oval shape. Now, an oval, basically what it is, just a flat circle. You're going to do that with purple paint. And it's okay if it drags through the green. All right, now once you have that in, we're gonna treat the cup almost like we treated the head. We're gonna create the edges first before closing it off. So on either side of your oval, all you're gonna do is just drag a straight line down. The longer you make the line, the taller your cup is going to be. So it's up to you. Now, when we close off our cup, you don't want to drag a straight line all the way across because it's going to look a little awkward. We want to make it still look a little rounded. So on the bottom edge, all we're going to do is give ourselves a half circle, or basically a smiley face, a little happy face. Just round it out. Now, once you have that shape in, leave this oval alone. You're going to cover the entire bottom part with pure violet paint, or that purple paint. You're just going to dip your brush into some more of that purple paint, and you're just going to paint the bottom half of your cup with purple. Like I said, these paints are very, very thin, so don't worry if it isn't getting as thick or solid as you want it to be. No matter how many layers you add on, I promise you it's still going to be thin. And then once you're done with that, you're going to cover the entire top part, or that oval, with just black paint. So the bottom is going to be purple. This oval section, that open section, is going to be black. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next step. We don't want to spend too much time on that because we want it to dry really quickly, because we're going to work on the robe. Immediately after the robe, we're going to place on these little hands. So we're just going to move us on. If you're still working on actually filling it in, take your time. I can always repeat this step. So when it comes to doing the robe, we want the entire robe to be the same color. This is a large section. We're going to switch to a large brush once you're ready to move on. Now remember, clean out your large brush as best as you can to take all of those previous colors off and pat it dry. For this, since I'm making a gray, we don't have gray, we just have black and white, we're gonna be doing our color mixture. So make sure you have your paper plate next to you, ready to go. So I'm gonna use my large brush as a spoon, and I'm gonna grab scoops of a color. Now to make this not too dark or not too light, because remember, the black is very, very strong, I'm going to grab 2 scoops of white. So 2 big scoops of white. I'm gonna add it to my mixing plate. So 2 scoops of white. To this, I'm gonna do half a scoop or a little dab of black. And you mix that up. So you should get a really nice gray color. Of course, if you want to make it lighter, add some more white. If you want to make it darker, add some more black. But we want to keep it a really nice neutral gray. So 2 scoops of white, a dab or half a scoop of black. Now the first thing that I want to do, don't worry about the elbows or the arms just yet. The first thing that you want to do is very carefully paint in his entire robe first. Be very, very careful once you start getting closer to the cup and the bottom of his head. But we're just using our large brush to paint in his robe. So I'm gonna let you guys do that for a bit, and then I'll teach you guys how to add on his arms. All right, so for this next step, we're still using our big brush and we're still using that gray mixture. What I want you guys to do is just dip the tip of your brush into your water cup and let some of that dirty paint water fall into your paint pile. What this does is that it reactivates that paint to make it easier to glide on your canvas. And we're gonna need that to create the elbows, the arms for his robe. So I just added a few drops, like 1 or 2 drops of water to my paint pile just to make it a little bit creamy. The way that we add on the arms, we're just gonna do it in one sweep, one go. So we really want this paint to be as easy and as manageable as possible. Now, for this next step, it is a tiny bit complicated, so if you need an adult's help, let them know so they can help you out. Because once you add it on, it's not coming off. Since we're using a little bit of black paint with this, it's very permanent. So the easiest one that I like to start off with is actually on the left side. And again, I like to break all these steps down into shapes so it's easier for us to understand. The way that we create the edge of the arm, I want you to think of a very morphed C shape. So we all know a C looks like this. But this one's just a little bit elongated. It's a little long. So if you want to watch me do it first before you do it yourself, feel free to do so. You can overlap part of his chin a little bit too, just to make it look like it's a really nice big robe. And all I'm doing is pressing down with my brush. I'm not going to lift my brush until I'm all the way done. So I'm going to start off where the cup comes out. And all I'm going to do is just elongate that C shape and dip right in. So as you can see, it's like a C shape. It's just a really, really long, kind of dipped C shape. And that's what I'm going to do for both arms. I'm going to do that on both sides. I'm going to start wherever the cup is. Now this time on the right side, it's going to be more like a backward C. And you're going to fill that in completely. All right. So we're gonna let that section dry just a tiny bit before we actually start adding in the hands and the wrinkles and the outlines and all that good stuff. So during this time, we let his head and that green on his ears and his head dry just a tiny bit. So at this point, we can actually start giving him a face and some eyes and bringing him to life. So again, if you're still working on adding in the arms and parts of the robe, take your time. I can always repeat this next step. So, of course, I can't do the eyes and the ears and all that good stuff with my big brush. So I'm going to use my small brush. Once you're done, just place your big brush back into your water cup. Remember, give your small brush a really good rinse before you take it out, and then pat it dry. Now, all we're using for this is black paint. Now, if you use black paint straight from your palette, it's a little thick and it dries a little fast. So just like we did with our gray paint, we're gonna add a little bit of water to this just to make it easier to glide on the canvas. So just dipping my small brush straight into my water cup. And I'm just adding some water just along the very edge of my black paint pile. I don't have to add it to the whole pile, just a little section along the edge. And you're gonna start to see your paint get a little bit more creamy. All right, and just a little tip, if you wanna have a really nice pointy brush, what you're gonna do is you're gonna hold your brush at an angle and you're gonna twist it. If you press down on your paper plate on an angle and you twist it and you lift it off, it should give you a nice fine point. All right, so since we're doing these really nice fine details, if you need to take a breath before each section, feel free to do so. It's totally fine. So the first section or the first part that I want to add to his face is his mouth. Now this is really, really close to the cup. Now you can make him look frowning like in the example on the TV, or you give him just a little slight smile like on my example. It is up to you. Now this one, just to give you a reference point, is probably as long or as wide as your cup. So you don't want to do it from edge to edge. You just want to keep it within the size of your cup. And again, all I'm doing this is just in one go. I'm adding it really, really, really close to the cup. Just one simple line. Then you can make them look frowning, very serious. You can give them a slight smile or a smirk. I like to think he's a little sassy, so I gave him the smirk on mine. All right, so we're still using that watered down black paint. We're not gonna add the nose yet because we wanna add on the eyes. And it's always best to do the eyes first and then add the nose wherever we have an open spot. It's a little more complicated if we add the nose and then try to do these really nice complicated eyes. It's just gonna get all messed up in there. So for the eyes, if you're a little afraid to do this exact shape, like I said before, we're gonna be breaking this down into easier shapes for you. The first shape that we wanna do on either side of his head is a big circle. Now this one is about the size of a $50, maybe a ping pong ball. Maybe smaller than that, but on either side of his head. And I like to do it right about where his robe comes up from his head. Remember, about the size of a $50 or a little bit smaller than a ping pong ball. Now I want to space them apart a little bit because I want to give myself some space to point it out. So I don't want them too close just yet. Again, before doing all these, if you need to take a deep breath to help you, taking a deep breath is always, always easier. Now, before I fill it in, what I'm going to do is I'm going just to point the corners. So it's almost like a check mark or almost like a sideways V. Before I fill them in on the very, very right corner of his left eye, I'm going to give myself a little point. And on the left corner of his right eye, I'm going to give myself another point. Once you have that in, you're going to 100% fill that in completely. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to do that, and then I'll teach you guys how to do the rest of the face. All right. So I know some of you are still filling in the eyes, and that is okay. I'm just going to go ahead and give you the next step so you know what to do immediately afterwards. Once you have the eyes filled in and placed, what you're going to do next is just give him a little nose. Now, this is going to be right in between his eyes, and it's just going to be basically like a U shape or just a very, very tiny, tiny happy face. Just right in the middle of his eyes. Now, the only other thing we're going to do for now is give him some eyebrows. We don't want to worry about the wrinkles underneath his eyes just yet. We're just going to give him the eyebrows up top. So I'm going to give you guys just a few minutes to add on those details, and then I'll let you guys know what the next step is. All right. Again, some of you are still working on adding in those final details. Not final, but the details for now, and that is okay. I'm just going to move you guys on to the next step so you know what to do right after. So we're going to let all of that dry just a tiny bit. We don't want to give him the white dots in his eyes to make him look shiny, because if you try to do that, it's just going to turn into a gray. And we don't want that. We want those white eyes or those white dots to be very pristine. So we're just going to let those dry just a tiny bit. What we're going to do now is we're going to start to fill in his ears. Now, if you notice, this is a slightly different pink color than the one that we've been using in our background. The reason being is if we try to use pink straight from our palette, if you add it right on top of the green, both paints are very thin. It's going to turn into a brown, and that's going to look a little awkward. So we're going to do a color mixture. We're just going to make the pink a little bit brighter so it looks a lot nicer and more like pinky flesh ears instead of weird brown ears. So I'm going to be using my large brush for this. Remember, every time you take out your large brush, give it a quick rinse in case it has a little bit of paint residue on it. And then you're going to pat it dry. As long as you have an open spot on your mixing plate, you should be good to go. For this, I'm going to be grabbing 2 scoops of pink. And you can be very generous with the pink. 2 scoops of pink. To this, I'm going to be adding half a scoop of white. Again, so half a scoop of white. 2 scoops of pink, half a scoop of white, and you can instantly see it become such a brighter color. Now, when we start painting in the ears, we want to make sure that our brush is very, very flat because we have these really thin, pointy areas. So once you're done mixing that up, what I like to do to flatten out my brush is on either side of my brush against the very edge of the plate. All I'm doing is just brushing both edges against the edge of my plate, and it should give me a nice flat brush. Now, what I'm going to do first to paint in the ears, I'm going to start very, very close to his chin first, and I'm going to create that really nice swoop coming all the way up to the point. So for example, it's going to look kind of like an arch, almost like a rainbow. I'm going to create this first swoop here, and you can do it on either side of your ear, because we don't want to cover the entire ear up. We still want to see some green. And then starting from either point, you're just going to follow the shape of the ear. You're just going to bring that all the way back down until it connects. And then you're going to fill all of it in with this nice pink color. All right, so believe it or not, we're about maybe halfway, more than halfway through this. All we have left to do is to add on his cute little hands grabbing the mug or the cup, and then all these nice details on the robe, and then to outline his head and bring out some more details. Then after that, if you want, you will have the chance to add some more color and some more blue to your background before we start to add on some stars. So to get that out of the way, the first thing that we want to do is give him those 2 little hands. So I'm going to be using my small brush for this, giving it a quick rinse before I take it out, and I pat it dry. Now remember, we use the small brush for the black paint, so give it a good rinse. Now, if we try to use green straight from our palette, it's a very, very thin paint and it won't show up as strong because the purple is actually a little bit thicker. So what I'm going to do is basically what I did with my pink. I'm going to add a little bit of white to it so you can see it a little bit easier. So with my small brush, I'm going to grab 2 scoops of green to a dab of white. Just a little dab of white. I'm gonna add an extra dab of white to mine just to make sure that it shows up. So it's gonna look like a lighter green, but once it dries, it's gonna dry into a normal green. Now, the easiest way to describe the shape of his hands, if I turn this finished canvas over to its side, it looks like a heart, and that's all it is. So on the other side, again, it's just a little heart. So if it's easier for you to move your canvas all the way over to its side, and then draw a heart right over the mug, feel free to do so. All you're doing is drawing a heart. And then you're just filling that in. It's still pretty thin paint, but we're actually gonna outline this with a little bit of black, so do not worry. And of course, it's gonna dry pretty quickly. So towards the end, if you just wanna give it a nice layer of that pure green on top, just to bring it out a little bit more, you can. We gotta let it dry just a tiny bit first. So once you have that filled in, you're gonna let that just chill for a bit before we actually outline it. We're actually going to outline his robe first before we finish outlining his head, his ears, giving him a little bit of wrinkles underneath his eyes, and all that good stuff. So once you're done filling that in, give your small brush a good rinse. We're gonna go back to black. We're gonna let that green dry just a tiny bit. We're gonna go back to black, and remember, we like to use the black that's a little watered down. So if yours is a little dry, that's okay. Just dip your brush into your water cup and mix a little bit of water with a little bit of black paint, so it's easier for us to paint with, because we're gonna start outlining. Now we gave our robe a lot of time to dry, so it's good for us to start outlining now. Now the easiest section to outline first are the very straight edges going all the way down. So the harder you press with your brush, the thicker that black outline is going to be. The lighter you press your brush, the thinner that line. So it's up to you. I like to give myself a really nice thick black outline. So I press down with my brush. And I'm just going on either side of his robe, right underneath his arms. And before I start doing the really complicated stuff within his arms, I want to outline those C shapes for his arms first, just on the outside. So starting where the cup is, I'm just outlining those C shapes on the outside first. So we did the edges of the robe, and now we're just outlining the arms on the outside first. So once you start doing the wrinkles in the sections where his arms are, if you need to take a deep breath before you do this, feel free to do so. I always suggest. So these are basically going to be C shapes, just very close, tiny C shapes We have two of them on either side and they're really, really close. So once you're ready to do that, first what you're gonna do is you're gonna close out your rope. The section where that arm comes out of, you're gonna close it and you're gonna bring it closer to the cup. So you're finally gonna close that out. So just brought that line all the way up. And once I'm ready to do the smaller C's on the inside, all I'm doing is just following the shape. I want to give myself a pretty big gray section. So I'm not going to do it really, really close towards the outer edge. I'm going to focus more towards the inside. And I'm going to do the smaller one first. And again, all I'm doing is just following the shape of my rope. So do a small one first. And then you do a medium one, still following the same shape. So they look like little rings. And if they don't look similar, that is okay. Now the fun part comes into the wrinkles of his robe, right down here. All it is just a series of squiggles. Now you can add as many or as little as you want. We have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squiggles in total coming down the rope. Some of them go all the way down. Some of them stop about 3/4 of the way down. So it's up to you. And all you're gonna do is just add really nice squiggles just to make it look like they're folds and wrinkles of the rope. Now the lines don't have to be solid, but if you want them to be and you're having trouble, just add a little bit more water to your black paint pile. There are about 5 total in both examples, but if you want to add 6 or 7, or if you just want to add 4, that is okay. Now, believe it or not, the hard part, or what was the hard part of this section, is over. All we have left to do is just to outline the rest of our guys. So you can start to outline his head all the way around, and that's going to include his ears, the top of his head, his other ear, all the way around. But once you start to do the pink section of his ears, you don't want to outline the whole thing. All you're going to do is just outline the top edge very carefully. You're just going to outline the top edge of the pink ears. But then everything else you're just going to outline. So the rest of his head on the outside, you're going to outline the whole thing. All right, I know some of you are still outlining, and that is okay. I'm just gonna let you guys know that all we have left to do with this black paint is to give him those tiny little under eye bags or those little wrinkles underneath his eye. And we can finally outline his tiny little hands. So we gave ourselves a little bit of time for the green in his hands to dry. So when you add the wrinkles underneath his eye, don't add it all the way across. Just add it just a tiny bit underneath his eye. We don't want to add it all the way across. And then very carefully outline his hands. So once you have his hands outlined, and then you added in those little wrinkles underneath his eyes, you have one of two options. You can go in and start adding in the white of the eyes now with your small brush, or you can also add in the white of the eyes once you're ready to start adding in the stars to your background. Now, before you add the stars to your background, that is a finishing detail. So if you want to add more color to your background now, would be the time to do so. So I usually like to do it all at once. So I'm not gonna add in the white of the eyes now until I start adding in the stars to my background, but if you wanna add them now, feel free to do so. The white of the eyes are just 2 dots. Now, one way to make sure that he doesn't look cross-eyed is wherever you add the biggest dot on either eye first, make sure to match it on the other side. So for example, I added in the big circle towards the right, and then the smaller circle towards the left, and I did the same exact thing for the other eye. Bigger circle towards the right, smaller circle towards the left. And that's one way to ensure that he doesn't look a little cross-eyed. But if you want to add some color back into your background, now would be the time to do so. And you're just going to be using your big brush, clean big brush. So for example, if I felt like the pinks or the purples in my sky were just a little bit dull, if I go back in with some fresh pink paint, it instantly brightens that back up. So you're just adding in a fresh layer on top of that. And the good thing about this is that you can actually overlap this into part of your black, which is going to give you that nice fuzzy look that we've been going for. So since that black and that blue are very, very dry at this point, you can even add a little bit of pink on top of those colors because it's not going to mess up. It's just dry at this point. So if you want to add on or work on the background for now, feel free to do so. Once you're done with that very carefully, you're just going to use your small brush, white paint, and you're just going to add dots all over the sky for stars. And then you're going to finish off by adding in the circle or the little dots for the eyes. Feel free to work on it on different sections. If you want to do eyes first and then do the background, it's up to you. of his eyes, and then I use the rest for stars, and you can add those stars wherever you want. But once you're done with that, that is officially the very, very last step I have for you guys. Feel free to keep tweaking and adjusting if you want to, but that is officially the very, very last step. For those of you at home, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again, either at home or in studio the next time. Bye.